My brother Mark stood in the center of our parents' living room, a triumphant smile plastered on his face as he held up a glass of champagne. "To my promotion," he announced, "Senior Vice President." The room, filled with aunts, uncles, and cousins, erupted in applause. My mother clapped the loudest, tears of pride shining in her eyes as she gazed at her perfect son. I watched them from the doorway, my hands steady, my heart a block of ice. I waited for the noise to die down before I spoke, my voice cutting through the celebratory buzz. "Before we continue, Mark," I said, holding up a thick manila envelope, "I think everyone here would be interested to see the contents of your work computer." The smiling faces turned towards me, confused at first, then hostile. My mother's expression curdled into pure hatred. She had no idea that the man she worshipped as a saint was the same man who tried to have her own grandson, my son, taken from me forever. They thought this was my usual jealousy, the bitter outburst of the family failure. They didn't know this was the end. You're probably wondering how a family party turned into a public execution. The answer started 5 years ago. On a perfectly normal Tuesday at a playground, with a folded-up piece of paper that saved my life and destroyed theirs. 5 years earlier, the sun was warm on my face. My 5-year-old son, Leo, was squealing with laughter as he flew down the bright yellow slide for what must have been the 20th time. It was a perfect, ordinary afternoon. I sat on a bench watching him, feeling a rare sense of peace. I was a single mother, working a dead-end job and constantly living under the shadow of my family's disappointment. My brother, Mark, was the golden child, the successful lawyer, the one our parents poured all their pride and resources into. I was the screw-up who got pregnant too young and never amounted to anything. But here, in this small park, none of that mattered. It was just me and my boy. That's when I saw her. A woman in a plain trench coat sitting on the opposite bench. She hadn't been there a minute ago. She was watching us, not with any warmth, but with an unnerving intensity. I clutched my purse a little tighter, a sudden chill running down my spine. She stood up, walked directly toward me, and without a word, pressed a folded note into my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Read this," she whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Then go." Before I could even process what was happening, she turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. My hand trembled as I unfolded the small piece of paper. The message was written in block letters, stark and urgent. "Take the boy and leave now. Don't look back. They know you're here." For a long moment, I just stared at the words, my blood turning to ice. They know you're here. Who were they? The note felt like a prank, something cruel and nonsensical, but the woman's panicked eyes had been real. I looked over at Leo, still happily oblivious at the bottom of the slide, his face beaming. A wave of fierce, primal protection washed over me. I wasn't going to wait to find out if it was a joke. I stuffed the note into my pocket, walked over to the slide, and forced a bright smile. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Guess what? We're going on a surprise adventure. We have to go right now." Leo, thrilled at the idea of an adventure, didn't argue. He grabbed my hand, and I walked him swiftly out of the park, fighting the overwhelming urge to run. Every person we passed felt like a threat. Every car that slowed down seemed to be watching us. The world had tilted on its axis. Once we were in my beat-up car and the doors were locked, my first instinct was to call for help. I fumbled for my phone and dialed my brother, Mark. He was the smart one, the lawyer. He would know what to do. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and impatient. "What is it, Clara? I'm in the middle of something." I quickly explained what happened. The woman, the note, the feeling of being watched. I expected concern, maybe even alarm. Instead, there was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Clara, seriously?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "A secret note at the playground. You sound like you're having one of your episodes again. Are you sure you're not just stressed? Maybe you should try to get more sleep." His dismissal was so immediate, so absolute, it felt like a slap in the face. "Mark, I'm scared." "This felt real," I pleaded. "For God's sake, you're a single mum working a terrible job. It's no wonder you're paranoid," he said coolly. "Just go home, lock the door and relax. You're imagining things. I have to go." He hung up before I could say another word. I sat there in the driver's seat, the phone still pressed to my ear, a cold dread seeping into my bones. He hadn't asked if Leo was okay. He hadn't asked a single question about the woman. He just shut me down. It wasn't just a lack of concern, it was a total refusal to believe me. And in that moment, a horrifying thought began to form in my mind. What if he wasn't just dismissing me? What if he was telling me to go home because he already knew exactly what was going on? My brother's cold voice echoed in my head. Go home, lock the door, and relax. It wasn't advice, it was a command. And it was the last thing I was going to do. If they knew I was at the park, they knew where I lived. My apartment wasn't a sanctuary, it was a trap. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I had to think. I couldn't go to my parents. They worshipped Mark and had long ago written me off as a lost cause. The police, what would I tell them? That a strange woman gave me a note and my brother was mean to me on the phone? They'd look at my shabby clothes, my old car, and listen to Mark, the successful lawyer, who would paint me as a hysterical, unfit mother. He would use the law to take Leo from me, I was sure of it. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs. A dark grey sedan was behind me, keeping a steady distance. It had been there for the last 3 blocks. Paranoia, Mark had called it. But it felt real. I made a sudden right turn onto a street I didn't need to take. The sedan turned right behind me. I made a left. It followed. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just any car. I recognized the slight dent on the front bumper. It was the car that belonged to Mark's legal partner, a man I'd seen at family dinners. The stranger hadn't been a random crank, and my brother hadn't been dismissive. He'd been lying. They weren't just watching me, they were actively following me. Panic gave way to a cold, hard clarity. The note was right. I had to leave, now. I couldn't go back to my apartment for clothes or keepsakes. Everything I needed was sitting in the booster seat behind me, humming a little song to himself. I drove to the nearest ATM and withdrew every penny from my account, $312. It was a pathetic amount to start a new life with, but it would have to be enough. Where could we go? The faces of friends and family flashed through my mind, each one a dead end, a potential link back to Mark. Then I thought of my Aunt Carol, my mother's estranged sister. She lived in a small, forgotten town in rural Oregon, hundreds of miles away. My family hadn't spoken to her in 15 years, ever since she'd told my mother that she was turning Mark into a monster and me into a ghost. They'd called her bitter and jealous. I now realized she had been the only one who saw the truth. I got onto the interstate and headed north, merging with the river of traffic. I didn't look back. The city skyline, the only home I had ever known, shrank in my rearview mirror until it was gone. The first 24 hours were a blur of cheap coffee, greasy gas station hot dogs, and the endless drone of the highway. Leo, thankfully, was a champion traveller. To him, this was the greatest road trip of his life. He saw every new state line as a victory, every dingy motel room as a castle. I played along, manufacturing a cheerfulness that felt brittle and thin. At night, after he'd fallen asleep in the strange, lumpy bed, I'd sit in the dark and count the remaining dollars in my wallet. Fear was a constant, coiling knot in my stomach. I was running from a ghost, an undefined they with my brother's face. Every time the phone rang with an unknown number, I'd flinch. Every time a car stayed behind me for too long, my heart would pound. I was no longer Clara, I was a fugitive. The proof came in a grimy truck stop in Northern California. Leo was asleep in the car, and I had run inside to grab some water and use the restroom. A small television was mounted in the corner, playing a national news program. And then I saw my own face, a smiling photo from a Christmas 2 years prior, plastered on the screen. Below it, a chyron read, "Fears for missing mother and child." A news anchor was speaking in a grave voice. My brother, Mark, appeared on screen, his face a perfect mask of worried concern. "We're just so worried about my sister, Clara," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "She has a history of mental instability. We believe she's off her medication and is a danger to herself and her son Leo. If you see her, please do not approach her. Call 911 immediately." I stood frozen in the aisle, a bottle of water clutched in my hand. He had done it. With a few calculated lies, he had turned me from a victim into a villain. He wasn't just trying to find me, he was poisoning the well, ensuring that if anyone found me, they would see a crazy, dangerous woman, not a mother trying to protect her child. He was using his power and his perfect reputation to hunt me down and strip me of my credibility, my identity, and ultimately my son. A cold rage, purer and stronger than any fear I had felt, burned through me. This wasn't just about escaping anymore, this was about fighting back. I paid for the water in cash, my head down, and walked back to the car. I drove for the next 10 hours straight, fueled by nothing but rage and the last of my caffeine. We crossed into Oregon as the sun rose, and a few hours later, I pulled onto a quiet, tree-lined street in a town that looked like time had forgotten it. I found the small blue house with the overgrown garden exactly as I remembered from a single childhood visit. I took a deep breath, carried a sleeping Leo to the porch, and knocked on Aunt Carol's door. After a moment, the door creaked open, and a woman with kind, weary eyes and the same fiery red hair I remembered stood before me. She stared, her eyes widening in recognition. Before she could speak, the words tumbled out of me, raw and desperate. "Aunt Carol, I'm in trouble, I need your help." Aunt Carol didn't ask a single question. She simply opened the door wider, her eyes full of a deep, sad understanding, and ushered us inside. "Get in, both of you, quick," she said, locking the door firmly behind us. She led us to her small, cozy kitchen, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and old books. She settled a still sleeping Leo onto a soft armchair with a handmade quilt, then sat me down at her worn wooden table and placed a steaming mug of tea in my trembling hands. "Now," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "tell me everything." And so I did. The words spilled out of me in a frantic, desperate torrent. The playground, the cryptic note, Mark's chilling indifference on the phone, the car following us, and finally, the televised assassination of my character. I told her how he'd branded me as unstable, a danger to my own child. When I finished, breathless and close to tears, Carol just nodded slowly. She wasn't shocked. She looked weary, as if she had been waiting for a story like this for years. "That boy was always rotten," she said, her voice low and filled with an old anger. "What your mother and father never understood, or never wanted to admit, is that Mark isn't just ambitious, he's cruel. He enjoys taking things from people, especially from you." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "This isn't the first time he's tried to ruin someone to get what he wants. Do you know why I don't speak to your mother anymore? It's not just because I thought she babied him. It's because 20 years ago, your father was about to get a huge promotion. Mark, who was just an intern at the company, found a mistake in your father's project, a mistake he'd secretly caused himself. He went directly to the board of directors. He got your father fired and took the promotion that was meant for him. Your parents, they forgave him. They said it showed he had drive." The story hit me like a physical blow. He had betrayed his own father. My entire life, I had been told Aunt Carol was the problem, the one who was bitter and divisive. The truth was, she was the one who had refused to play their sick game. My brother wasn't just a bully, he was a sociopath, and my parents were his willing accomplices. But why? I whispered, the question that had haunted me for days. Why would he want to take Leo? Carol sighed. Mark is about to close a massive international deal, one that requires a security clearance and a pristine public image. A single sister with a child and no powerful husband is a loose end. An unstable sister who abducts her child and is institutionalized. That's a tragedy that earns him sympathy. He isn't just getting you out of the way, he's using you as a pawn to make himself look better. Her words laid the truth bare, cold and sharp. My son was just a chess piece in his game of power. The rage I'd felt at the truck stop returned, but this time it was focused. It was a weapon. Running away is over, Carol said, as if reading my mind. Now we fight back. To beat a man like Mark, you can't just tell the truth. You have to prove it beyond any doubt. For the next 2 weeks, Aunt Carol's quiet little house became our headquarters. We lived like ghosts, keeping the curtains drawn, never answering the phone, and paying for groceries with the cash Carol had saved. While Leo played in the backyard, blissfully unaware of the danger we were in, Carol and I spent hours at her kitchen table with her old, slow laptop, piecing together a strategy. My public identity was that of a dangerous fugitive. To change that, we needed an unimpeachable source, and our only lead was the mysterious woman at the playground. "Think Clara," Carol would say, pushing a cup of coffee towards me. "Every tiny detail. What did she look like? What did she wear?" I closed my eyes, picturing that frantic, terrifying moment. "She was plain," I said, frustrated. "Brown hair, a beige trench coat, nothing stood out." But then a flash of memory. "Her hand," I said, my eyes flying open. When she gave me the note, I saw her ring. It was gold with a strange symbol on it, like a C and a G intertwined around a set of scales. That was the key we needed. Carol, a retired librarian who knew her way around digital archives, went to work. We started with Mark's law firm, Crawford and Gaines. The logo was 2 C's, back to back. Not quite right. We spent days digging through the firm's website, social media pages, and press releases. We scanned photos from holiday parties and charity galas, zooming in on every woman standing near my brother. And then we found it. A photo from the annual Bar Association dinner 2 months ago. There was Mark, smiling his predator's smile. Standing next to him was his senior partner, David Chen, and on David's arm was his wife, Sarah. On her finger was the ring, the official crest of the Chen and Gaines Group, a partnership that had since been absorbed by the larger firm. It was her, Sarah Chen, the wife of the man whose car had followed me from the park. The revelation was dizzying. Why would she help me? The answer was as chilling as it was obvious. If Mark was capable of doing this to his own sister, what was he doing to his business partner? Sarah hadn't just been warning me, she was likely trying to save her own family from whatever my brother was planning. He wasn't just cleaning up loose ends, he was staging a coup, systematically destroying anyone who could stand in the way of his precious deal. We had found our ally, but she was in the belly of the beast. "She risked everything to give you that note," Carol said, her expression grim. "Which means she's just as trapped as you are." We now had a name and a motive, but it also created a new, terrifying problem. How could we possibly contact Sarah Chen without Mark finding out and silencing both of us for good? Contacting Sarah Chen felt like trying to send a message to a prisoner in a fortress. Any email, text message, or phone call could be intercepted. Mark was meticulous and paranoid. He would have all digital avenues locked down. We were stumped until Carol, while dusting an old bookshelf, pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. "In my day," she said, a glimmer in her eye, If you wanted to send a secret message, you didn't use a wire, you used paper. Her idea was brilliant in its simplicity. We would use the public library, an institution Mark would consider ancient and irrelevant. We'd leave a note for Sarah in a specific book, telling her how to contact us safely. The problem was telling her which book to look in. We needed a signal, something that would look innocent to my brother but would mean something to Sarah. She gave you the note at a playground, Carol reasoned. She's a mother. We'll send her something a mother would receive. We decided on a flower delivery. It was a classic, almost cliché gesture. Mark might see it, but he would dismiss it as a sympathy gift from one of her friends regarding my public breakdown. The key would be the card. I spent an hour at the small town's public library using their computer to create a burner email account and order the flowers from a national delivery service. I chose a bouquet of white lilies, symbolizing innocence and rebirth. The card was the crucial part. I typed a simple message. So sorry for your family's recent troubles. Hoping you find the peace you deserve, thinking of our old book club discussion of the woman in white. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble that Sarah was a reader, that she would understand the reference to the classic mystery novel about hidden truths and powerful men manipulating women. We were betting everything on a shared love of literature. After placing the order, an agonizing silence descended upon the small house. We had sent our flare into the darkness, and now we could only wait and hope someone saw it. For 3 days, every time the phone rang, we both jumped. I barely slept, my mind replaying the gamble over and over. Did she get the flowers? Did Mark see them first and throw them out? Did the message mean anything to her at all? On the 4th day, Carol made a call. She spoke in hushed tones to an old friend, another librarian who still worked a few shifts a week at the central branch in the city I'd fled. "Agnes, it's Carol," she said, her voice steady. "I need a strange favour. Could you please check the library's single copy of Wilkie Collins' The Woman in White? Check it for any loose papers. If you find something, call me back from the payphone across the street. Don't use your cell." When she hung up, she looked at me, her face pale. "Now, we wait," she said. "Either her friend finds our message from Sarah, or we know we're on our own." The next 2 days were the longest of my life. The quiet of Carol's house felt heavy, charged with unspoken hope and fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Leo, picking up on my tension, grew quiet and clingy. One afternoon, as we were reading on the floor, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. "Mommy," he asked, "when can we go see Grandma and Grandpa again?" The question was a knife in my heart. How could I explain to him that the people who were supposed to love him most were the very reason we were hiding? I just hugged him tight and whispered, "Soon, baby, I promise." On the evening of the 2nd day, the phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. Carol and I looked at each other, our breath held. She picked it up, her face a stoic mask. "Hello," she said. She listened for a long moment, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the receiver. "Yes, read it to me, please." Her eyes met mine across the room, and she gave me a single, sharp nod. There was a note. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest as Carol scribbled furiously on a notepad. "Thank you, Agnes," she said finally. "Be safe." She hung up the phone and slid the notepad across the table to me. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. It was from Sarah. "He knows you're gone, but he thinks the problem is solved. He told me they had you committed. He is moving faster than I thought. You were right to run. He is liquidating our joint assets and framing my husband for financial crimes. Everything, the fake invoices, the offshore account numbers, the correspondence planning it all, is on a single encrypted hard drive. He's arrogant. He keeps it as a trophy. The drive is codenamed LEO. He keeps it in his old storage locker from his university days, Unit 237 at Sentinel Storage on Elm Street. The only key is hidden in the lining of his lucky winter coat, the charcoal grey one. The coat is at his personal tailor, Giovanni's, for seasonal storage. You have to get it before he moves it. Please be careful. He is a monster. Burn this. I read the note 3 times, each word landing like a hammer blow. He named it after my son. The evidence of all his crimes, the proof that could destroy him and save us, was on a drive named Leo. It was the ultimate act of possession of psychological warfare. He wasn't just trying to take my son, he was using his very name as a shield for his evil. The warning was just as chilling. He thought I was already dealt with, locked away in a mental hospital where no one would ever listen to me again. He was closing his net, and soon he would come for my son. I looked up at Carol, the fear in my veins turning into ice-cold resolve. The waiting was over. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. Going back was not a simple decision, it was a declaration of war. We spent the next day preparing for my infiltration into the city. I couldn't return as Clara, the frantic mother from the news reports. I had to become someone else, a ghost. In her sunlit kitchen, Aunt Carol took a pair of shears to my long, recognizable brown hair, cutting it into a short, choppy style I would never have chosen. Then came the dye, a harsh, cheap black that stripped away the last vestiges of the woman I used to be. We went to a thrift store in the next town over and bought clothes that were completely unlike mine: dark jeans, a grey hoodie, and a baseball cap. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a woman with haunted eyes and a hard set to her jaw. This was the woman who could do what needed to be done. The hardest part by far was leaving Leo. How do you say goodbye to your child when you're heading into a battle you might not win? I knelt in front of him, my heart feeling like it was being torn in two. Mommy has to go on a very important trip for a few days, I told him, keeping my voice steady. You're going to stay here and have a special vacation with Aunt Carol. You have to be a good boy and listen to her, okay? He looked at me, his lower lip trembling. But I'll miss you, he whispered. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his hair, trying to memorize the scent of him. I'll miss you more than anything, I choked out. But I'll be back before you know it, I promise. Carol had made one more call. An old friend of her late husband's, a long-haul trucker named Gus, agreed to give me a ride. He was heading east and his route took him right through my old city. He asked no questions when he saw me, just tipped his hat and opened the passenger door of his massive rig. I climbed in, giving Carol one last grateful look as she stood on the porch, her arm wrapped protectively around Leo. The journey back was a strange reversal of my desperate flight. The miles of highway that had seemed so terrifying before now felt like a prelude to a reckoning. I wasn't running from Mark anymore, I was heading right for him. Gus dropped me at a sprawling industrial truck stop on the outskirts of the city just after dawn. "Good luck, kid," was all he said. I slid out of the cab and into the chilly morning air. The familiar skyline loomed in the distance, a concrete jungle full of memories and threats. I pulled the baseball cap low, clutched the burner phone and the cash Carol had given me, and started walking. First stop, Giovanni's Custom Tailoring. I had a key to get. Giovanni's was a relic from another era, an old-world tailor shop nestled between a sleek vape store and a sterile juice bar. It had a polished wooden door with a small brass bell that announced every entry. I spent 2 hours in a coffee shop across the street, nursing a single cup of black coffee and watching. I learned the rhythm of the place. An elderly man, who I assumed was Giovanni, ran the shop himself. He had a young assistant who left promptly at noon for his lunch break, returning an hour later. That was my window. I needed Giovanni to be alone. At 12:10, I saw the assistant leave. I took a deep breath, pulled my cap down, and walked across the street. The bell chimed as I entered. The shop smelled of cedar, steam, and old wool. Mr. Giovanni looked up from his sewing machine, his eyes peering at me over a pair of half-moon glasses. "Can I help you?" he asked, his accent thick and Italian. This was it. I straightened my shoulders, adopting the brisk, no-nonsense tone I'd heard my brother use 1,000,000 times. "Hi, I'm here for Mark," I said, intentionally leaving off his last name as if we were intimately familiar. "I'm his new assistant, Jessica. He's been called away on an urgent trip and needs me to pick up his charcoal winter coat from storage." Giovanni eyed me with suspicion. "Mark, he did not tell me about a new assistant or a trip." My heart hammered, but I forced a confident, slightly exasperated laugh. "Tell me about it," I said, rolling my eyes. "You know how he is. Everything is last minute. It's for that big international deal he's closing. The partners decided to celebrate in Zurich, and he's flying out tonight. He was very insistent I come to you personally. Said you were the only one he'd trust to handle his clothes." The mention of the deal and the flattery worked. A small smile touched the old man's lips. "Ah, yes, the boy works hard," he said, pride in his voice. "Always so successful." The words were like acid in my ears. He led me to the back room, a cavernous space filled with rows of garments shrouded in white bags. "The charcoal one, you said. It should be in this section." He left me there to look. My hands trembled as I sifted through the bags, the plastic crinkling loudly in the silence. I found it quickly, a beautiful, heavy coat made of dark grey cashmere. I could almost smell my brother's expensive cologne on it. I turned my back to the door and quickly felt along the silk lining near the bottom hem. My fingers brushed against a small, hard lump. A tiny, almost invisible seam had been resewn. I hooked my fingernail under it and pulled. A single, cold metal key fell into my palm. I slipped it into my pocket just as Giovanni called out, "You find it?" "Yes, got it," I called back, my voice hoarse. I zipped up the bag and carried it to the front. He took the claim ticket and I walked out the door, the bell chiming my exit. I had done it. Step 1 was complete. I clutched the key in my pocket and hurried down the street. A surge of adrenaline making me feel invincible. I turned a corner, my head down, and collided squarely with someone walking the other way. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled, starting to move past him. "Clara?" a familiar voice asked. "What on earth are you doing here?" I froze. I slowly lifted my head and found myself staring directly into the face of David Chen, my brother's partner and Sarah's husband. My blood ran cold. Of all the people in the entire city, it had to be him. My mind raced, searching for an escape, a lie, anything. But my disguise felt useless, my cover completely blown. David Chen stared at me, his eyes wide, not with anger, but with a desperate, frantic energy. Before I could run, he grabbed my arm, not roughly, but with an urgent grip, and pulled me into a narrow, empty alleyway between 2 buildings. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Sarah told me what she did. I've been searching for you for weeks." I was terrified he'd gotten to you. I stared at him, bewildered. You're not going to call him?" David let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Call him? Clara, he's destroying me. He's been cooking the books for months, creating a paper trail that leads directly to my desk. He's framing me to take the fall for his own fraud. In 2 weeks, he plans to anonymously tip off the SEC. I'll be disbarred and facing federal prison while he absorbs my half of the company and plays the part of the shocked, betrayed partner. Your disappearance was supposed to be part of his narrative, proof of how he has to deal with unstable people in his life." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Sarah's warning wasn't just about protecting me, it was a desperate attempt to save her own husband. We were all just pawns in my brother's monstrous game. My fear gave way to a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't just a desperate sister anymore, I was a key witness. "I think I can help you," I said, my voice low and steady. I opened my hand and showed him the small, cold key. Sarah got a message to me. She told me about a hard drive, codename Leo. It's in a storage locker. David's eyes widened in disbelief, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine hope on his face. His old university locker? Of course. His ego is so massive he'd keep his trophies close, he breathed. Clara, this changes everything. This is the physical proof I need. He immediately took charge, his lawyer's mind kicking into gear. We can't just break in. If we steal the drive, Mark will claim we planted the evidence. It'll be inadmissible. We have to do this by the book. We need to force his hand. He pulled a small, sleek burner phone and a set of keys from his pocket. This is a clean phone, and these are for a small apartment I rented under an alias. I thought I might need it myself. Go there. Stay put. Don't talk to anyone. I'm going to talk to a federal prosecutor I trust. With my testimony and your existence, we might be able to get a warrant. We're going to trap him. He gave me the address, his expression now one of grim determination. He thinks you're a ghost, and he thinks I'm a fool. He's about to find out how wrong he is. For 3 days, I waited in the sterile, anonymous apartment, feeling like a caged animal. It was the longest I had ever been away from Leo, and the ache of his absence was a physical pain. David called twice with brief, cryptic updates. Things are in motion. Stay put. On the third night, he called with the final plan. He's been served, David said, his voice tight with tension. A federal subpoena to produce documents related to our partnership. He'll stonewall, but he'll be spooked. He's going to go for that drive. We need to make him go tonight. He's at your parents' house right now for his promotion party. You need to go there. Your presence is the one thing he'll never expect. It will push him over the edge. And so, the story comes full circle. I walked into that party, no longer the timid scapegoat, but the instrument of my brother's destruction. I wore a simple black dress Carol had bought for me, my short hair styled, my face calm. The shock in the room was electric. My mother gasped, my father dropped his glass, and Mark looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. His perfect, confident mask shattered, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. I let the silence hang in the air before I walked to the center of the room and held up the manila envelope David had given me. It was just a copy of the subpoena, but they didn't know that. Before we continue, Mark, I said, my voice ringing with cold clarity, I think everyone here would be interested to see the contents of your work computer. That was all it took. He stared at me, his mind racing, realizing his carefully constructed world was about to implode. He saw the key to the storage unit in my hand, the one I'd palmed just for this moment. He mumbled a weak excuse about a forgotten urgent errand and practically fled the house. He had no idea he was running directly into a federal sting operation. He didn't see the unmarked cars that fell in line behind him, or the agents waiting for him at Sentinel Storage. They caught him in the act, standing in the open doorway of Unit 237, holding the small encrypted hard drive, the one cruelly named after my son, in his hand. The fallout was swift and total. My brother, the golden child, was facing a litany of federal charges. David Chen became the government's star witness, his name cleared. My parents' reputation was left in ruins, their perfect family exposed as a toxic lie. I didn't stick around to watch the empire burn. I took the first flight back to Oregon. My real family, my son and my aunt, were waiting for me. Today, the sun is warm on my face. Leo is squealing with laughter as he flies down a bright yellow slide. We're at a small, peaceful playground in our new town. There are no secrets here, no lies. Just the quiet joy of a life I fought for, a life I reclaimed. I am not a CEO or a lawyer. I am just a mother, watching her son play in the sun, and for the first time in my life, I am free.